question may seem controversial, but I hope that it's not too controversial. First, I want to thank you for coming here. You said the solution is A, to treat Israel like any other country. We should be even-handed towards the conflict. And second, Israel is a democracy and should be treated accordingly. Now, without my personal opinion and no one else's personal opinion, we have a historical precedent. We have the following historical precedent. A country that has designated their population to be subhuman, namely Nazi Germany, decided to create a ghetto, Poland, the Warsaw Ghetto, equivalent to what Gaza has become today. We have a country that had a Gestapo SS. They used to take people in the middle of the night and torture them, children included. That is the Shin Bet, the General Services in Israel. We have a country that has performed slow ethnic cleansing against an entire population in front of the whole world. We have this happening today. Now, some people say, oh, this is rhetorical politics. How could you compare Nazi Germany to anything that's happening today? I agree we can never point the finger every time. But if we make a list, point by point by point by point, we see a very disgusting historical precedent happening right before our eyes. So how can we say today Israel should be treated even-handedly and defer to the fact that it's calling itself a democracy, when we look at the criteria of what a democracy is, it doesn't fall to the basic criteria of any democracy, which is basically its ethnicity, trumpeting its democratic identity. So I would like to have some responses to that.
Let me first address your point about whether or not Israel is a democracy, and then let me turn to the comparison with Nazi Germany. First of all, there are flawed democracies in the world, and the United States, for example, was considered a democracy for all of the 20th century. Yet between 1900 and 1964-65, when the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights were enacted, Black Americans were victims of Jim Crow. It was an absolutely horrible situation. It's just hard to believe that the United States of America treated a substantial portion of its body that way, body politic that way. But nevertheless, everybody considers the United States to have been a democracy from 1900 to 1965. It was just a flawed democracy. I think that Israel is, by almost all reasonable definitions, a democracy, even though it treats its Palestinian citizens as second-class citizens. And there's almost no question on this. For those of you who have any doubts, you can go read the Orr Commission report. The Israeli government commissioned a report. It's called the Orr Commission report. It says the Palestinian citizens or Arab citizens in Israel are second-class citizens. So Israel is a flawed democracy, but nevertheless, almost everybody treats it as a democracy. Because it fits the basic definition of what is or is not a democracy. And you could point to all sorts of other countries around the world over time that have serious flaws. With regard to the comparison with Nazi Germany, I actually at one time did a great deal of research on the German killing machine in the East, and I've thought about writing a book on the subject, and I know a great deal about how the Nazis operated between 1933 and 1945, and especially between 1941 and 1945. And there is simply no comparison between what the Germans did and what the Israelis were doing to the Palestinians. And it should be clear to all of you here, I am not making light of what the Israelis have done to the Palestinians. It's not what I'm up here arguing. I understand that Israel's policy towards the Palestinians is morally bankrupt, and I think we should change that. But let me just say a few words about the Third Reich. By my count, the Nazis murdered, we're not talking about combat deaths, 22 million people in World War II. In addition to murdering 3 million Polish Jews, they murdered 3 million Polish Catholics. For those of you who know anything about the Soviet Union, the canonical number that's used today is that the Soviet Union lost 24 million people. Of that 24 million people, 8 million were military deaths, 16 million were civilian deaths. 16 million were civilian deaths, 8 million were military deaths. Of the 8 million military deaths, they murdered 2.3 million prisoners of war. Of the 16 million civilians, my best estimate is they murdered about 12 million of those civilians. 22 million people were murdered by the Germans. Furthermore, they were bent on systematically murdering every Jew in Europe. They were systematically bent on murdering every gypsy in Europe. And I think the evidence is clear that Poland was going to disappear from the map. And except for those Poles who had Aryan characteristics, all the Poles were either going to die immediately or be worked to death. They had genocidal tendencies like we have never seen before, talking about the Germans here during World War II. The Israelis, for all the terrible things they're doing to the Palestinians, are not practicing genocide, in my opinion. Given any reasonable definition of what the Israelis are doing, it's not genocide. It's not even mass murder. There's been ethnic cleansing for sure. What they're doing in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip now is inexcusable. But it pales in comparison to what the Nazis did. The Nazis, in a very important way, are almost in a league all by themselves. And I think it's not helpful, to be perfectly honest, to compare what the Israelis